Hi, everybody. I didn't really have anything planned as far as like a joke or a funny story to tell you, so I decided to just do a silly voice. I hope that was okay. Welcome to Ask Away. Thank you all for being here. Those of you who are with me live. As always, if you are watching live and you're in the chat and you are planning on asking a question or sharing a super chat or something like that, please hold on to those until I get through the patron questions, which I always answer first, and then I will turn my full attention to the live chat, and we can talk for the rest of the show, and I'll answer as many of your questions as I can. But first, as always, to the patron questions to start. And the first question from my fine Patreon patrons this week comes from the star of the live chat every single show, our own dear friend, some random geek, who says, and by the way, just before I get to the question, sorry, some random geek, I don't mean to delay your answer here, but because I did miss the regularly scheduled Ask Away 2 weeks ago. I postponed it to today because of the death of my granny. So I'm answering questions from that previous solicitation for questions. So some of these questions, a lot of these questions will be like a month old. So if they reference things that you're like, oh, that seems like kind of an old thing to talk about because it's been a month, that's why. So anyway, back to the question, and some random geek who says, content warning, Contrapoints, Natalie Wynn discourse. So canceling is a thing, according to Contrapoints in latest video, which is only part one, despite being over 100 minutes. I watched it with the mindset of, well, I'm a critic of Natalie Wynn's behavior and actions online. I wonder what she will say about people like me. Here are some of my takeaways. Contra will not disavow Buck Angel because she likes Buck, thinks he has done a lot of good for the trans community, isn't a true scum. I also think Contra won't disavow Buck because I think she agrees with Buck on a lot of things. Contra compares doing research on whether Buck Angel outed Lana Wachowski in publications like Rolling Stone, mind you, to creepy stalking. Contra compares her critics of trans anarcho-socialism with an anime avatar to internet fascists because, as she puts it, how can you tell, especially since anonymous is anonymous is anonymous, while I am a trans anarcho-socialist with anime avatar? So she compared me to a fascist. A liberal applied horseshoe theory to me again. Contra did not regret doing the brunch gate at VidCon 2017 with June's Shoe on Head and Greg Armored Skeptic. She said if Twitter won't accept her apology, then she might as well apologize to 4chan. She compared her Twitter critics to pedos on 4chan. Granted, that is a possible joke. She could handle online TERFs and fascists, but it was the canceling caused by trans Twitter that got to her, implying that trans Twitter are worse than TERFs and fascists. And this one is very damning. She Me Too'd a prominent figure in leftist politics, but won't because she doesn't have faith in vigilante justice on social media. She's blaming and shaming her critics for not coming forward and outing a sexual predator because of cancel culture. Something that needs to be talked about is stan culture. I've seen many people, some of whom we both respect, say that this cancel culture needs to stop. Contrapoints is a comrade. I'm going into full-on Contrapoints defense mode, which makes me wonder, what does Contrapoints have to do to get her stans to criticize her? I think stan culture is a problem. My friends are getting online abuse for being outspoken against Contra and highlighting these faults of hers, and yet Contra seems to have an army of fans and stans that will go in defense mode and saying of how awesome she is. Isn't that a criticism of people like Sargon and Bering? Granted, Contra is not as bad as Sargon and Bering, but she does have an army of uncritical fans and stans. P.S. Natalie Wynn has done good work in the past, which doesn't negate the criticism of hers. I'm totally fine with people liking her videos and being patrons of hers. Watch who you want and support who you want. Well, I agree with a lot of that. I think some of it you're probably, at least from my point of view, you're being a little too hard on her or taking maybe too harsh of an interpretation of some of what she said. Like, I do think she does draw comparisons in that video, and she does make jokes about things where she sort of compares her Twitter critics to people on 4chan. And I do think that is a joke. And I think, I didn't take it as her saying that the people who are trying to, that trans people who are trying to cancel her are worse than TERFs and fascists. I think she was saying that when trans people try to cancel her, it hurts her more, or it's more upsetting to her than TERFs and fascists because they aren't her natural enemies. But overall, I do think you make a lot of really good points. And look, I'm not gonna stake out I'm not gonna plant too much of a flag on this because I do like Natalie. I do appreciate her work, and I also think that the people who are sort of washing their hands of her and saying, okay, that's it, we're done, have a point. And I feel like you mentioned stan culture, and there is a lot of that going around. There is a certain camp of people who are like, look, you can't, like, there's no legitimate reason for saying, okay, you know what, I'm out with Contrapoints. Like, if you do that, then you can't possibly have a legitimate grievance. You're just being too sensitive, or you're jumping on the bandwagon and piling on and, attacking a vulnerable person. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I do think that lots of people I know personally who have voiced criticisms of Contrapoints videos of late, I believe they are arguing in good faith. I believe when they say something that she said upset them, that they are telling the truth. I believe that they have a legitimate grievance with her videos and with some things that she has said and with some associations that she has made. I myself said, and again, I'm not a trans person, so I feel like whatever concerns I have should take a backseat to the concerns of trans people, specifically non-binary people, because they are the group that is the most vocal and have been the most insulted and hurt by Natalie's various statements and who she chooses to associate with and things like that. But I am bothered by the fact that she's not more bothered by the VidCon pick. The so-called Brunchgate pick. Like, if that, I would like it very much if she was bothered by that, and if she would apologize for that, or at least say, I regret doing that. I wish I hadn't done that. In hindsight, that was not a wise thing for me to do. I wish that she would say that. I wish that she felt that way, because I honestly think everybody in that picture who isn't Shoe on Head or Armored Skeptic should be grossly ashamed of themselves for being in that picture, and should wish that they could not do that if they had it to do over again, because I think it was shameful. I still like all of the good people in that picture. I haven't canceled any of them, but I think that's a fucking embarrassment, and they should never have done it, and they should be sorry that they did it now. And I wish that they were more sorry about it. So that bothers me. But that's not, to me, that's not enough to say, oh, fuck them, I'm washing my hands of the whole thing. But a lot of people have said that, and I think they have legitimate reasons. So I'm not going to say, as a lot of people who are defending Natalie are saying, I'm not going to react to the criticism of her and the opposition to her as though there's no legitimacy there, because I don't think that's fair. I think there is a legitimate grievance, a legitimate beef that people can have with her. And I feel like the opinions of other trans people, and particularly non-binary people, deserve to be taken at face value and deserve to be respected. And if they say that she has said something that hurts them or offends them, and her apologies or attempts to atone for it have not been sufficient for them, I think they deserve to be respected in that. I don't think they deserve to be just hand waved away. So yeah. That's about all I have to say about it. Next question is from Carlisle the Cinephile. Hello, Steve. I have a question I've been pondering for a while now. Do you think it's truly possible for a work of art to be objectively bad? A lot of people who hold unpopular opinions on movies, music, books, video games, etc. will try to justify their enjoyment of that property with phrases like, it's just my opinion, or art is subjective. This is usually used as a way to shut down discussions with people who disagree with them, but in a way it's true. We all bring our upbringings, cultural backgrounds, life experiences, and personal tastes with us when we witness any sort of piece of art, and all of those factors will inform how we react to it. Is it fair or right to declare that a work is objectively bad when it's possible that it just didn't resonate with us in the way that it might for somebody else? I'm glad you asked me this question, Carlisle, because this is something that... Hold on a second. I had to take a drink. This is something I've talked about a lot, and I feel like I I talk about this every so often on the Late Seating podcast. And I've talked about it in my own videos from time to time before too, and that is, no, art is, there is no such thing as an objectively bad movie or an objectively bad piece of art, period. I don't think that those terms are the proper terms to use. I think that our appreciation of art is entirely subjective. And that's just the way it is. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't argue about it. It doesn't mean that we can't talk about it. And it doesn't mean that it's always sufficient to just say, well, that's my opinion, and that ends any possible argument. Yeah, I do think that critical analysis and art appreciation and art criticism are necessary and useful and entertaining and enjoyable fields. And you can't just delegitimize all of them by saying, it's all a matter of opinion. It is all a matter of opinion, but we can still voice our opinions in articulate ways and agree and disagree with each other and have productive conversations. But no, there is no such thing as an objectively bad movie. You know, I think that the movie Man of Steel is terrible. I think it's just awful. Other people think that it's a good movie. Some people have even told me that they think it's their favorite Superman movie. I do not get that. I do not get that at all. I do not see how you get there. I do not understand what people like about it. I think it's a pile of garbage. But that doesn't mean that I'm objectively right, and the people who disagree with me are objectively wrong. It's a difference of opinion. It's a matter of taste. So no, there is no such thing as an objectively good or bad movie or book or TV show or whatever. It's all a matter of opinion. But that doesn't mean that we can't talk about it, or we can't have very strongly held opinions, or we can't disagree with each other and have productive conversations. But objectively speaking, there is no such thing as a good or bad piece of art. It's based on our own subjective experience of the art and how it makes us feel and what it makes us think about and how we react to it as individuals through our subjective experience. Next question is from Wellington Marcus. Hi, Steve. I searched your YouTube channel and could not find your opinion, so I hope this question isn't a retread. Steve, which Star Trek timeline and place would you live? Me, I think I'd choose to live on Earth in the TNG timeline, but as a nurse, I'd also consider DS9 Bajor and work for the recovery effort on behalf of the Federation. And thank you for sending me to Jessie Gender's channel. I'm loving her content. Well, I'm glad that you enjoy Jessie's channel. I really, I think I've been able to send a few people her way through mentioning her stuff on my videos. So I'm very gratified that other people have found Jessie's work and enjoyed it. And I would probably say Earth and TNG. I feel like I've answered this question relatively recently, maybe in the last few months. I think if I had to pick some place to live, it would be Earth in the TNG era, because it seems like, or really probably any Federation planet in the TNG era seems like it would be a pretty good place, but Earth specifically is probably where I would want to put up my house or whatever. Next question is from Dr. Babylon. Throughout American history, Christianity has been used both to defend the status quo and to advocate for reforms, revolutionary change. It has been a weapon of both the oppressor and the oppressed. During slavery, the Bible was used by slaveholders to argue in defense of their peculiar institution, and by abolitionists to attack it. After slavery ended, the Bible continued to be used by some to defend white supremacy and others to argue for racial equality. In the past, capitalists and socialists alike have claimed Christianity as the basis for their ideals. Over the last few decades, however, something strange happened. Conservative politics has become more overtly religious, while liberal and leftist politics have become more secular. What do you think happened? I'm not really sure. I feel like, generally speaking, society has become more secular just as time has gone on, just overall, I think society has become more secularized, and so as people who are part of more progressive groups or have more progressive political opinions or political ideologies, leftists and progressives have just naturally sort of gravitated away from religion, and conservatives have held on to it and nursed a much more regressive, less modern and with the times version, less flexible, I should say, less flexible version of religion. Probably, I guess that's as good of an explanation as I can come up with. I feel like just the general secularization of society as time moves on is probably the explanation. But I'm open to other people who have different ideas about that. But if I had to guess as to what is going on, I think it would be something like that. Just the general secularization of society and progressive-minded people naturally gravitating more toward that than toward religion, even a more progressive liberal form of religion. Next question is from David Colby. So Star Wars came out, The Rise of Skywalker, and I have no idea, and I had no idea how intensely invested I was in Rey being just Rey until it was taken away from me, and she was replaced with, spoilers for anyone who cares, a Palpatine. This sucks. I hate it. Should I, A, harass the creators until they change their minds, or B, write even more fanfic, or C, just go back to only watching and caring about Star Trek? P.S. I share your love of the Nova class and think it should get more love. Too much attention in Star Trek is focused on the big important ships. Give us the underdogs for a little bit. P.P.S. I have a new book out. It's a steampunk fantasy adventure harem romance thingy called Catastrophe at Dawn. Here's the link. And the link to that new book by David is also in the description of this video. If you want to go click the link and go straight to Amazon and see if you want to check it out in the description. I don't think I am as invested in it as you are, but I feel exactly the same way about Rey and about the revelation, the retconning, really, of her parentage in Rise of Skywalker. I vastly prefer where it was left in The Last Jedi. It's not even close. I much, much, much prefer Rey not being a part of either Luke's family or Palpatine's family or anybody else's family, right? I much prefer just Rey, right? And I think that's one of the things about the movie that annoyed me, and probably the most glaring instance of the problem I had with it that I mentioned in my review video, which is that it takes every obvious choice there is to take. It goes down it makes every safe, easy choice. And so, of course, they say, oh, actually, we changed our minds. Rey is part of a dynasty. She is part of this dynastic lineage in Star Wars. And that's such a boring, predictable way to go. It reduces Rey. It makes her so much smaller and less interesting. And I am not a fan of that choice either. And I'm especially not a fan of it because it undercuts what, for me, is the best single scene in the entire sequel trilogy, which is the scene in Last Jedi when Kylo tells her, "You're nothing. Your parents were nobody. You have no place in the story, and you're nothing." That's such an amazing scene. It's just an absolutely heartbreaking scene. It's so vicious for him to say that to her. You can tell that it just breaks her heart to hear it, and yet, as Kylo tells her, she already kind of knew that was the case. But it also defines who Rey is. It gives her a place in the story because now she doesn't have anything to cling to or to lean on. She's just herself, and it really. It's a great scene and it's a great choice for the character, and I just love everything about it. And now I guess it's like, oh, sorry. Doesn't count. We changed our mind. It's actually this other much less interesting thing. So I'm not as emotionally invested in it as I think you are, but I am completely on your side. I think it was a terrible, terrible decision. And what should you do? I would say write more fanfic, because I don't think you should stop watching Star Wars. Like, I still love Star Wars. I'm not going to just stop. I mean, I love Star Trek more, but I still love Star Wars. I don't plan to just stop watching Star Wars because of it. I'll just continue to occasionally grumble and piss and moan about it. But no harassing the creators, and no swearing off Star Wars, in favor of Star Trek, for me. Anyway, that's the choice I'm making. Next question is from General Contact Unit Problem Child. Most politically aware people in the UK think that if Boris Johnson is too unreasonable when negotiating with Europe during the transition period, they might cut us off, leading to a hard Brexit at some point over the next 12 months. How moral do you think it is to try and put pressure on the leadership of a country by doing things that will hurt the general population of that country? I mean, Boris is a millionaire. He won't be hurt by any of the shortages that could result from hard Brexit. At least in the case of the UK, you could argue that Boris was elected, so the British population are somewhat culpable for his actions. I have issues with this argument, but you can make it. And ethics aside, because he's an elected official, so it makes sense to try and motivate him by doing things that will help or hurt the British population. But what about countries that don't have elected leaders? Is it ethical to put trade sanctions on North Korea that will hurt the North Korean general population when, short of attempting a revolution, they have no control of what the Kim regime does? Last year, you got mad at WWE for doing an event in Saudi Arabia. I kind of feel uncomfortable with saying, sorry, Arabians, you don't get to ever watch wrestling because your government that you have no control over is really shitty. I see the argument that you're making. I'm not completely unsympathetic with it. I do, especially in cases like Saudi Arabia or North Korea, where the people do not have any power short of a popular overthrow of the government over the government. It's not as though the people can just go to the polls and choose new leaders next time. So yeah, I do understand why we maybe should have at least some hesitation in supporting things like economic sanctions or other measures that are intended to put pressure on governments to change their policies or to change their behavior, but actually only end up making life miserable for the people in the country. That is something that I think we should be aware of. In terms of the WWE thing, though, that is a business decision that an American business made because they wanted to make lots of money from the totalitarian regime that runs Saudi Arabia. I guess you could say, well, at least the people get to watch wrestling, but the wrestling show is being used as a propaganda tool by the authoritarian government that controls the country. So in order to give the people a wrestling show, the wrestling company is aiding and abetting the dictatorship that is oppressing the people. And I don't think the benefit of getting to see American pro wrestling is worth the compromise of the wrestling company getting into bed with the totalitarian government and helping them to, put on a happy face on the things that they're doing to people in that country. So no, I'm completely in disagreement with you about the WWE thing. I think that's completely inexcusable and unconscionable. But in general, like one government putting pressure on another government that could result in hardship for the people, that is something that I think deserves consideration and something that we don't often think about. Next question is from Ayame. Do you prefer stories with subtle themes and morals or more in-your-face themes and morals? Well, I prefer subtlety, but in-your-face themes and morals are not something that I don't automatically turn off a show or sort of subtract points, so to speak, from something if it is too obvious. I mean, there are episodes of Star Trek, for instance, that have incredibly obvious ham-fisted political messages that I think are wonderful. And the fact that they are incredibly, incredibly obvious about it, for me, in that case, does not subtract from the show. But in general, in principle, I prefer subtlety. And not only because I think that makes for a better story, and that's just a better form of storytelling, is if you have a point to make, if you have something to say, which hopefully you do, you say it through your characters, you say it through your story, you say it through your themes in a way that the audience gets the point, but doesn't feel like they're being cracked in the head with it. You know, I prefer that to, you know, hitting people with a sledgehammer. But sometimes you just have to hit people with a sledgehammer, you know? And if it is a good message, well delivered or powerfully delivered, I don't necessarily have a problem with it being super obvious. But given the choice, I prefer it to be subtle, because I think, because when you get the point, I think it comes across a lot better and comes through even more powerfully. And also, it makes for a better story. Next question is from Neo-Normie UPS Man of the Apocalypse. Have you watched the new Contrapoints video? As I think that people really need to get some balance, as they're seeking truth and seeking torches and pitchforks, and no one is perfect. Everyone has at some point said something in haste, or had something they have said taken out of context. Also, people, especially Americans who consider themselves lefty, liberal, and woke, need to realize other cultures are very different. And you, Steve, have said the N-word on a video before, just as in the UK, the C-word is a commonly used word. I once got banned by a girl who was a friend of a dominatrix I used to chat with, and I merely said, as her and her girlfriend were dressed as Santa's elves, that they were Christmas crackers, which, as a present British people, pull both ends, and there's a bang, and inside a paper hat, a dad joke, and some toy like a magnifying glass or a clip-on mustache. She thought cracker in terms of a racist, and because I was blocked, I couldn't explain the confusion. Much of the dislike of Americans, especially in Europe, is due to your judgments of alien cultures and it not being helped with assumptions such as how American culture is nothing like the UK and EU, so much that US troops of color experienced their first taste of multiculturalism in the UK in 1942 to 45. So I think that really the policy I use is as I prepare to tweet is I look at what I've written, speak it into a reflective surface, and think, what would I feel if a complete stranger said this to me? You might want to make that a message for all online interactions, because just like I witnessed in the internet blood sports, YouTuber self-destruction, there are vindictive people who love to see people in pain and distress, and they will look up anything as ammunition, like that N-word. Well, you're right. I don't think people should. I did see the Contrapoints video, and there were parts of it that I thought were very good and things that she needed to say, and then there were also parts of it that I think did not help her case at all and made her look worse. And a lot of the people who are really mad at her for some things that she has said and done seem to have felt the same way. That if in viewing it in terms of an apology or a make good to the people that she's hurt, that it wasn't good enough. But that there are some things that she said that needed to be said, and that it's good that she said them. But overall, you're right. I don't think we should be, and this is something that Natalie mentioned in her video that I do agree with. I don't think we should be mining everybody's past, looking for reasons to be upset. However, if something does come up that is a bad thing or an embarrassing thing, I think we need to take it seriously, and we need to respond to it responsibly. So it's take something like the fact that I've said the N-word in past videos. I've taken responsibility for that. I've said I'm not going to say it anymore, even in citing an example or quoting someone. I'm just not going to say it anymore. And if someone, but even having said that, if someone saw one of those videos and was hurt or offended by me saying it, they're completely entitled to that feeling. And if they're pissed at me and they expect me to apologize to them for it, I will happily apologize to them for it, because I shouldn't have done it. And if they think my apology isn't good enough, then they have every right to not accept it and to just not watch my videos anymore. And I have to live with that. Like, I have to accept that as the person who committed the offense. I can try to explain myself if that is solicited. I can ask for charity and forgiveness, and I would hope that I would get it, and I would hope that my overall conduct is such that people would accept my apology and accept my retraction and continue to view me as a person they can trust and watch and feel that, I'm not going to hurt them or offend them or alienate them. But if they end up feeling a different way about it, that's up to them. And I can't begrudge them that, and I don't feel like it's productive for me to whine and complain about it and play victim about it, because I don't think I'm a victim of that. I feel like it's someone reacting in a reasonable way to something that I did. And with Contrapoints, I think much of the anger and hurt based on things that she has said and done is similar to that. Like, I feel like it is good. It is in good faith on the part of people who are upset with her. And I think in those situations, the best thing to do is to acknowledge that you really did do something to hurt those people, and that you owe them an apology. And if you offer them a sincere apology and determined to do better next time and to improve your behavior going forward, and if that's still not good enough for them, they have every right to feel that way. Like, they don't owe you forgiveness, so I mean, it kind of runs both ways. Are there people who have treated Natalie unfairly? Yeah, sure there are. But not all of the people who are pissed at her are people who are treating her unfairly. And not everyone owes her forgiveness or understanding or the benefit of the doubt. So I agree with the point you're making, but I also think we have to be mindful of the fact that, everybody has the right to decide for themselves who they're going to pay attention to, who they're going to support, who they're going to point other people to as a good person or a good commentator or a good voice that deserves to be listened to or whatever. And people have the right to make those decisions for themselves. And if they have decided for whatever reason that Natalie is no longer a person that they can do that for, that's up to them. And, there are quite a few people I have heard who have come to that decision, who have very reasonable and I believe sincere, heartfelt reasons for feeling that. We can't just wave it away by saying, oh, it's just cancel culture, or it's just outrage culture, or it's just the internet doing what the internet does. Because a lot of it, a great deal of it, is not that at all. It is people who sincerely are hurt and feel that they can no longer trust her. And that's really too bad. It's too bad for her, and it's too bad for them, because she is an incredibly talented person with a massive platform, and I'm sure they would like it if they could trust her more as an ally. Next question is from Ahoy Erno. What's the one thing from way back when that you're weirdly proud of, like Al Bundy and his 4 touchdowns? I'm a talentless, jittery lefty, so winning a drawing contest as a 9-year-old is something that still puts a smile on my face more than 20 years later. Mine is kind of similar to that, actually. I don't... There's maybe 1 or 2 things I could think of. I won a drawing contest when I was in kindergarten. I drew a dinosaur. I drew a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and it got first prize in a drawing contest. And I was just insufferably pleased with myself over that. So that could be something I could cite as something that I'm still like weirdly proud of. And that's like 35 years ago. So I've got you beat for that. And there's something else too. Oh man. I remember, we had a writing assignment in, I think, senior English in high school, and we wrote, we read a short story, and I forget what story it was. I wish I could remember what story it was. But our assignment was to write a continuation of that story. And so I wrote a continuation from, my version of it, and my story was one of those that was picked to be read out loud to the class, and I got up in front of the class and read my, sequel or epilogue or whatever you want to call it to this classic short story out in front of the class, and they actually applauded. Like my fellow students actually clapped for me, which I was kind of blown away by. I thought that was really cool, and I still think about that and think, wow. I bet if I read that story today, I would think, oh Jesus, this is terrible. Like, this is so bad. What could they possibly have been clapping for? But it's still a really nice memory. So maybe something like that I would look to as something to still be proud of after all these years. Next question is from Andrew C. Hawkins. For a while now, I've held that the CIA is an unaccountable hive of manipulators, torturers, and killers that should be abolished, with the role of foreign intelligence gathering restored to the State Department. I mentioned this over drinks with a couple of liberal friends who both immediately balked, saying that the CIA has done some bad things, but we need them. I didn't really get the chance to discuss it before the topic changed. What do you think, Steve? Do we need the CIA, or should it have ended with the Cold War? You know, I've honestly never thought about it before I read your question, but the idea of reassigning the necessary duties of foreign intelligence to the State Department and sort of dissolving the CIA as an agency is kind of an interesting idea, because you're not saying we just shouldn't conduct foreign intelligence. You're not saying that, you know, we should just completely end that phase of American foreign policy. You're just saying that we shouldn't do it the way the CIA has done it, and we should disband the CIA as an organization that, you're right, was came to prominence and became the CIA as we know it during the Cold War. And now that the Cold War is over, perhaps there is not as much of a need for it as there was 30 or 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And maybe we can just reassign the necessary duties of the CIA to another agency. I think that's a really interesting idea. I'm not totally against disbanding the CIA and trying something different. Obviously, the CIA has a terrible track record, as you say in your question. There is a sense that it is largely unaccountable. There is a terrible history there of torture and of overthrowing governments secretly and of doing all kinds of unethical things in the name of national security, in the name of furthering American interests. And there's certainly a case for just getting rid of it and for continuing to do the things that it does that are necessary under a different umbrella and with hopefully a greater degree of transparency and accountability. So I think it's a really provocative idea and a really interesting idea. I'm kind of on board with it. I would be willing to try it. You know, I don't have a super strong opinion on it either way, but I would be willing to try it for sure. Yeah, let's maybe not do the CIA let's send everybody who works for the CIA on vacation for like 5 years and just see how we do, you know? Next, not really a question, more of a comment from Michael Dodge, who says, sorry to say, but not a fan of the new format of Facepalm Monday. Well, I got that a lot. A lot of people did not like the first episode of the new live stream format of the Facepalm 5, and that's why I changed it. I tweaked it a little for the most recent episode that was just this past Monday, and I feel personally as the presenter that it went a lot better this week, and I think doing it the way I did it this week is the way I'm going to go moving forward with it, where the first portion, the proper Facepalm 5 portion, will be pretty tight and will not, I won't acknowledge the live chat. I won't go off on too many tangents. I'll just write some notes. I'll write some bullet points and just, go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 in a pretty efficient fashion and make my points and make my jokes, but move on quickly, and then fade to black for a few seconds, fade back up, and we'll just do a post show where it's kind of like this, where it's just me interacting with the live chat for half an hour or whatever, and then we end the show. I feel like that's a much better way to do it. So hopefully, if you saw the more recent version, you like that better. I know some people saw the more recent version and they still didn't like that either, and that's fine. I know a lot of people were attached to the old version and they're not going to like the new version no matter what, and I'm okay with that. I expected that. But hopefully the new version that I did on Monday and the way that I'm planning on doing it going forward will be a good compromise and will be more acceptable to people who didn't like the first week. Because I think the first week could have been a lot better too. So yeah, and for people who are wondering, the reason why I'm doing it live is because doing it as a recorded, edited video was beginning to take up more time than I had. Video production for the channel is incredibly time consuming, and I just got to the point where something else had to give, and it was either switch Facepalm 5 to a live stream and do it live to camera instead of spending a weekend editing it and preparing it, or just not doing it at all. You know, that was the other option. If I didn't do it as a live stream, the other option was just not doing it. And I wanted to keep doing it. You know, I think it's important. I think it's an important flavor of this channel. Like I like talking about current events. I like having that as a part of my content and as a part of my voice on YouTube. And I didn't want to just not do it anymore. So that's the way I'm going to do it going forward. So hopefully that's acceptable to most of you. This one is from Ask and Tell Project. I see cancel culture just like the PC culture and SJW terms before it. It was first used and normalized by conservatives speaking against progressive culture. Now we are using it without seeing that we are feeding their narrative of it being a bad thing. Yes, there are those who go overboard, just like with any opinions, but deciding not to support problematic people is a moral choice that I think is good. To a realistic point. Most of Hollywood productions have someone problematic, and I don't want to stop watching TV and movies. Do you agree we are falling into their narrative or not? How can we improve the discourse? Well, I agree with you completely. I am very much of the, I guess we would call it the Cody Johnson persuasion that cancel culture isn't really a thing. Or if it is a thing, it is certainly not a problem. Yes, there are instances where maybe people are attacked unfairly or are held to too high of a standard, but that doesn't happen nearly as often as the people who whine and complain about cancel culture and everybody being a snowflake and et cetera, seem to think it does. I don't think it is nearly the problem that a lot of people would like us to believe it is. And you're right. When you choose not to support a creator, an artist, a politician, whoever, because you feel they have done something problematic, because you feel that they have done something that is wrong, then choosing not to support that person is a moral choice. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with holding each other to standards of behavior and saying, you know, there has to be a certain baseline of we're going to respect each other's basic human dignity. We're going to respect each other's identities. We're not going to tolerate disadvantaged people being shit on for the entertainment of privileged people. Like we're not okay with that. And we're not going to go along with it as though it's necessary, because it's not. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And how do we change the discourse? I don't know. I feel like maybe those of us who see things this way just need to be more open and unapologetic about owning it, you know? And not ceding ground when people say, like, because people say, well, but you have to admit there are, sometimes it does go too far. Well, yeah, but not as far as I think you're trying to get me to say it goes. I feel like we have to stop ceding rhetorical territory to people and say, yes, of course, there are times when it goes too far, but very, very rarely. And I bet most of the examples that people would cite of cancel culture or political correctness running amok are not examples of that. They're examples of people saying or doing something they shouldn't have done, getting called out on it, and then being a dick about it instead of owning up to it and apologizing and trying to change. That's probably what the case is most of the time. Far, far more frequently than someone who has legitimately been mistreated by what we would call cancel culture. So I just maybe being a little more forthright and less apologetic about it could change the culture or change the discourse. But I agree with you completely. I could not agree with you more. Isaiah Taylor, I was going to talk about the Iran crisis, but that topic might get discussed elsewhere. Instead, Steve, how would humanity react if a JEM Hadar fleet came out of a wormhole in front of Earth? How would the U.S. military, and in fact the world, react to a Dominion attack? Would humanity survive? Oh, and in that case, I think humanity would only survive if A, the JEM Hadar allowed us to survive, or B, some equally powerful Star Trek power emerged through another wormhole in time to save our asses. A JEM Hadar attack might unite humanity, might bring us all together and allow us to put our differences aside to wage war against a common foe, but I don't think the war would last very long if we're talking 24th century Deep Space Nine JEM Hadar. Like, how would humanity react? We would die. Or at least most of us would, and then we'd probably end up in some kind of Battlefield Earth scenario, and that's not going to be good for anybody. Next question is from Shirley Singleton. Do you think the Ensign's log might have been inspirational to Star Trek Lower Decks, which is supposed to feature 4 ensigns? No, I really don't think. I would be surprised if anyone involved with producing Star Trek nowadays listen to our show. Our show is more popular than Jason and I probably ever hoped it would be, and we're super happy with the number of downloads and listens that we get. But it's not, it's not like a massively popular podcast. There aren't that many people listening to it that we would think, oh yeah, it's probably those Star Trek guys. They probably listen to our show and they're ripping us off. I really don't think that is the case. And also, the Lower Decks premise is old enough and popular enough and has been bandied about frequently enough throughout the Star Trek fan base that I don't think you could automatically assume that, oh, they must have ripped that off from Steve and Jason, because we didn't come up with it ourselves. Like, we came up with our show. We came up with our interpretation of that premise and what we chose to do with it. But the premise itself of, oh, what if they did a Star Trek show that focused on the junior officers instead of the senior officers, like that in and of itself is not a fresh idea. People have had that idea before. There was an episode of TNG called Lower Decks that was all about it. So no, I don't think the Lower Decks series has taken inspiration from me and Jason. But if they did, that's great, because hopefully it means that show will be really, really good, because our podcast is really, really good. Modesty. Next question is from Tom McDonald. Hey, Steve, another song-related question. How many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? How many times must the cannonballs fly before Trump is forever banned? Tom, my friend, the answer is blowing in the wind. And hopefully that wind is about to bring in another blue wave in November. That is my hope. My hope is that the wind is blowing in from the sea and there's a big old blue wave coming after it. And that will result in Trump perhaps not being forever banned, but being forced to vacate the White House and vacate political power. And hopefully a large number of Republican members of Congress will be obliged to go with him. Next one is from Joe McClory. There is a challenge I've given myself, and I want to share it. I'm not really one for New Year's resolutions, but I have been thinking about this for a while, and now seems like as good a time as any to try to make changes that will help me be a better person. I'm going to try to stop speaking of people in a way that even slightly dehumanizes them. I should be clear here for people who don't know me well. I don't use slurs of any sort to describe people and haven't in years, but I still call a person who is treating myself or others badly an asshole. And as much as it is cathartic at the time, I have noticed speaking that way is a good way over time to stop thinking of them as a person and thinking of them as a bad person or an asshole. And assholes do things that hurt people because they are bad. Thinking that way is easy, but it is not helpful. Understanding why someone is acting in a way that hurts people can help with getting them to stop, or at least a lot more than just writing them off as an asshole. I think that many who are upset with being called racist, sexist, or bigoted in many other ways may well have views that are a problem and should be criticized, but the more I think about it, the more I think calling them out by calling them bigoted is likely a bad way of doing it if making them change their ways is the goal. Telling someone that they or someone or something they care about is bigoted is a good way to get someone to shut down and become more defensive, and tends to do more harm than good. Now, I'm not saying that explaining to someone how they act or speak hurts others is going to make them stop, but, well, it is more likely to make them think. But even if it doesn't, viewing them as a bigot as opposed to a person whose views harm people is toxic to me and makes it easy to think of them as bad people instead of people that should be encouraged to be better. I don't expect this to be easy, and I expect to fail from time to time, but I expect this might help me be a more empathetic person who will hopefully make the world a bit better than if I didn't challenge myself to be a better person. What do you think? Is it worth trying? Or does trying too hard to humanize those who do harm for selfish reasons likely to leave anyone trying to do so more vulnerable to harm? Well, first of all, the idea is commendable, and I applaud you for the intention and for wanting to be more empathetic and for trying not to dehumanize people, even people who are being really, really terrible and mistreating people and hurting people. I think it's a wonderful goal to set for yourself, and I wish you luck. And I think, generally speaking, we could all probably do with moving more in that direction. But as with a lot of other things, I think it's case by case. You know, sometimes with certain people in certain situations, yeah, I think it could do more harm than good, or at the very least wind up not doing any good. You know, and I think you just have to judge that on a case by case basis, and I think you will. Like, I think you're a sharp enough person. Obviously, you wrote it into the question, so it's already something that you've thought about. So if you are interacting or responding to a particular person who you just think, I'm going to be wasting my breath with this person, or you try at first to try and understand them or talk to them or reach out to them, and you realize this is a waste of time, I'm not getting through to this person, then I think you should reserve the right for yourself to say, okay, this person is just an asshole and I'm not going to waste my time with them. Or at the very least, if you don't want to reduce them to that, because it dehumanizes them, as you say in your question, then say, well, this person isn't going to change their mind, or I'm not going to be able to change this person's mind or persuade this person to change their behavior, so I'm going to just cut bait on this one, right? I think you have to make those decisions on a case-by-case basis, and there will undoubtedly be times when you will find that the best thing is just to give up and say, okay, never mind. You go on acting like an asshole. If that's what you want to do, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm going to direct myself to something more productive. But in general, I think it's a nice idea, and I think it's a laudable goal. You know, and I think it's good in general to try and be more empathetic of people and to try and be less eager, less quick to just write people off and say, oh, so-and-so is just an asshole, you know, unless you really get to know them and you're like, oh no, there's no point in trying to reach that person, you know. Yeah, I think so. I think it's a good idea. It's a good idea, but it's something that you have to judge. You have to take people as you find them. And sometimes that means giving them the benefit of the doubt and being patient with them. And sometimes that means leaving them right where you find them and walking away. Next question is from Matthew Rick. Do you think that any Starfleet cadets have inadvertently passed the Kobayashi Maru by saying the ship in distress is in the neutral zone? We're not supposed to go in the neutral zone. Going into the neutral zone could trigger an interstellar war. Needs of the many and all that. Therefore, there is nothing we can do. Sucks to be them. Back to cataloging space anomalies. I mean, that wouldn't make for a very compelling dilemma in a show, but yeah, how could they not? How could that not be an acceptable solution to the problem? And see, it's still a no-win scenario because the people on the Kobayashi Maru are going to die, right? So the whole point of the Kobayashi Maru is there is no satisfactory solution, right? because if you cross the neutral zone to save the people, you violate treaty, and then you invite an attack, and your ship gets destroyed. If you don't cross the neutral zone and uphold the treaty, then the people in the Kobayashi Maru die. So it's a no-win scenario, and that's the point. But yeah, saying, shit, sucks to be them, but they're in the neutral zone, we can't go help. Yeah, that seems like an acceptable answer. Maybe not the noblest answer, but I think it would certainly have to be an acceptable answer, yeah. Here's one from John Burnsy. Roddenberry wanted TNG to be his magnum opus, this perfect society. I know, Code of Honor didn't seem like it was part of a great society, but you take those who the Enterprise met with, put them on a ship in orbit, and have the Enterprise try to communicate with them, and suddenly you've got Paul Winfield starting one of the greatest episodes ever, Darmok. And I know we move forward in time, but you can look back and see that maybe Roddenberry wanted TOS to be rough around the edges, and it both Kirk and McCoy used the green-blooded comment towards Spock. Yes, it was a pitch as Kirk in space defending the homestead like in Bonanza, but as the shows progressed, far more was gained than lost in both of the first two series. I know slavery was gone in the 60s, but apartheid was not, which is why you should watch all episodes when you watch any of the series, warts and all. You might not like what you are seeing, but you might be able to get an understanding of why an episode occurred because of a cringy episode before. Well, yeah, I agree with you that even the bad episodes of a show should be considered and should be taken into account when you're judging the show. And yeah, something from a bad episode could come back up in a future better episode. And yeah, I agree with that completely. But I feel like saying, well, I think actually Gene meant for TOS to be a little rough around the edges. Like, I think that's giving him a little too much credit. I don't think he had that kind of foresight. I think the flaws in TOS and in TNG as well, the flaws are the result of writers and producers and creative people involved having limited vision, having blind spots, having areas that they didn't know about, having biases or double standards that they weren't aware of or weren't willing to acknowledge. And all of that is fine. That's just being human. Like, that's a human condition, When you are made aware of it, as long as you try to correct it and try to do better, I think there's nothing wrong with that at all. None of us are perfect. There's no such thing as a storyteller who has ever told a perfect story that didn't have a single problematic thing about it or didn't have a single instance of something that could have been done better or could have been done more accurately or more sensitively or whatever because of the limitations of the writer, right? There's no such thing as that. And I think we should acknowledge that. And I don't think it's fair or accurate or wise to say, well, if Kirk and McCoy sometimes came across as a little racist towards Spock, well, that was probably by design. I really don't think that was the case. I don't think that it's worth throwing the entire series away because of that. But I don't think we should just say, oh, actually, that was Star Trek trying to teach us a lesson. No, I just don't think that was something that they saw at the time. I don't think that anybody had a problem with it, and I don't think that anybody considered using that as a way of teaching a lesson. I think even well-intentioned people can still get it wrong sometimes. And I think that's what happens in Star Trek from time to time. But I don't think it really serves anybody's interest to say, oh, actually, that was part of a design, because I really don't think it was. Here's one from Trekkie0623. Hey, Steve, I really enjoyed your episodes on DS9's resident space Nazis, our three main Cardassians. I was wondering about your thoughts on Discovery's resident space Nazi, the Mirror Universe Empress Giorgio, the leader of the Mirror Universe's fascist dictatorship. Given that she will very likely be a starring member of the new Section 31 show, do you see any satisfying way of giving Giorgio a redemption arc at all? Is there a way for Giorgio to show remorse for her actions in a way where she is forgivable? The entire idea makes me uncomfortable. Love your content. Keep it up. Well, I mean, there's a question as to whether or not we should even be telling stories where characters like Giorgio go through redemption arcs. I feel like that's a totally legitimate question to ask, to say, like, should we even be giving this character a redemption arc? But if the answer is yes, and that is part of what the Section 31 show is going to try to do, to try to redeem evil Giorgio. Yes, it's possible. I mean, it's dependent on a lot of factors. It's dependent on how, on how the character is written, on whether or not she is forced to face up to the crimes she committed, whether or not she is forced to change, to grow, to try and make good. And also, it's based on stuff that in real life shouldn't matter at all, which is, how good the show is and how good Michelle Yeoh's performance is and how charming and interesting and intriguing we find her character. Like, that can apply in a fictional world that it shouldn't apply to a real person because there are real consequences. But in a fictional world, that we can give them a little bit more slack and say, yeah, but the character is so well done or so well acted, or even if the redemption isn't really earned, the acting or the writing is good enough that it sells it to us, even though we know that it really shouldn't be acceptable. Like, there are things like that can happen to get it over the line that wouldn't be applicable if we're talking about a real person, But yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly possible to give Giorgio a redemption arc. I'm kind of glad I'm not writing the show, because I would have no idea where to start, where to go about doing it, because she was like galactic Hitler. Like, Gul Dukat was space Hitler. Mirror Giorgio was Hitler of the entire galaxy. So, I mean, how do you redeem that character? And again, should you even try? But I'll be very interested to see what the show is and how the show turns out, Next question is from Matthew Datcher. Trekkie or Trekker? Which is the correct term? I was listening to your Facepalm 5 this week, and I believe you used the term Trekkie, but I thought Trekker was most accurate. What's the difference between them anyway? Trekker was introduced, I believe, in the 90s by Star Trek fans who wanted a less dismissive term, because Trekkie kind of has, like, it's sort of a diminutive term, like, the Trekkies, you know what I mean? Oh, I'm sure the Trekkies will love that. When you put E at the end of something, there's something kind of reductive about it. It just sounds like you're putting someone down when you call them a Trek. Oh, a Trekkie, So it was introduced as sort of the more acceptable term. I personally don't have a problem with either one. I call myself a Trekkie. I don't think there's anything wrong with the term. I think it's probably too frivolous to say it's been reappropriated, because it's not like Trekkies are like an oppressed minority or something, but it's the same kind of thing. It's sort of owning what used to be the insult. You're kind of taking it and owning it. Like with the term nerd or geek, like people, it used to be an insult. Now people take that as a badge of pride and say, yes, I am one, same thing with Trekkie. But if someone prefers Trekker, I'm not going to argue with them. Trekker is fine too. I guess Trekker is probably the safer term, is the less likely to cause offense. But I generally consider myself and refer to myself as a Trekkie, and I think a lot of people do nowadays, and it's not really that big of a problem. Next question is from John Gingras. Hi, Steve. Excluding those cameos already announced, what is one Star Trek character you'd most like to see make an appearance in Star Trek Picard? Oh, God, how can I narrow it down to one? I'd love to see Worf. I'd love to see Beverly. I mean, with the history between Jean-Luc and Beverly, it would be awesome to see Beverly pop up again, to see where she is, what her life has been like. Yeah, but if I had to pick one, it would probably be Worf. I'd always be happy to see Worf, yeah. Worf or Beverly, probably. It would be nice to see Geordi, because it's just always nice to see LeVar Burton and shit. Like, oh, hey, Geordi, hi. But yeah, if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick Worf. And finally, from John Brockman. Hi, Steve. How are you? I am fine. Do you like dogs? I like dogs. I have a dog. His name is Wesley. There is no God, and our deaths will be as pointless as our lives. Where do you want to go for your next vacation? Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't really like to travel, I don't know. I guess I'll probably just stay home. I'll have a staycation. That's what I always do anyway. You know, if I ever take any time off. I don't really like the beach. I don't really like to travel. There's really nowhere that I'm like super eager to go. Like there's nowhere that I'm like, oh man, next time I get some time off, we're going there. Like I don't give a shit. So I can't really think of anything. But thanks for cheering me up with the whole, you know, our deaths will be as pointless as our lives bit. I always appreciate being reminded of that. Okay, that was the last question from my Patreon patron. So let's go to the live chat. Hi, everybody. How is everybody? Do we have any questions or comments, etc.? I noticed earlier that there was a super chat, and the message has been retracted, so I can't see what the message was, but it was for $2. So whoever sent me that super chat, thank you for that, even though it was retracted. I appreciate it. Here's a question from 255 AD. Kirk wanted to let the Klingons die when Praxis exploded. Picard was desperate to help Romulans when their sun went nova. Does that show Picard is a better person than Kirk? Maybe in that instance, yeah. But one of the things I liked about Star Trek VI and Kirk's characterization in that was that you saw him have to overcome that bigotry. Like it acknowledged that Captain Kirk had a prejudice against Klingons, and then through the course of the film, he is forced to confront it and overcome it. So it's a little unfair to Captain Kirk to say, oh, Picard was a better person than he was, because the whole point of that story was to show Kirk overcoming a prejudice. You know, so he has to start with the prejudice before he can overcome it. But yes, in those two situations, absolutely, Picard is the better person than Kirk, because Picard wanted to evacuate the Romulans, and Kirk said, let them die. Pedro Nagura. So, Steve, what alien race from Star Trek do you think got the best actors and actresses? Oh, man, that's tough. Probably the Vulcans. The actors who have played Vulcans traditionally have been pretty good. You know, Nimoy, fantastic. Mark Leonard, forget about it. Zach Quinto in the new one, I think, is a really terrific Spock. Ethan Peck did a really good job as Spock in Discovery. The Spocks alone have been a really solid group of actors. So I would probably say the Vulcans have been the best actors. Der Alte Trekkie says, maybe you come to Bonn, Germany and visit FedCon 3, or Dortmund, also in Germany, and visit Destination Star Trek. That feels like kind of a long plane ride. But thank you. I mean, maybe. Some random geek says, would you be for a society of actual democracy, direct democracy, where the people directly make rules instead of representatives do, like in a representative democracy? I'm not against that on principle, but I honestly don't have that big of a problem with representative democracy. On paper, I think it's a perfectly fine system. I think it's just it's the fact that it is it is easily corrupted by unscrupulous people. But in general, I don't have a problem with representative democracy. If there are checks and balances and there are mechanisms in place to sort of enforce ethics, I think representative democracy is a fine way of doing things. Super chat from John Burns. Thank you, my friend. Do you agree with the fact that mental illness isn't considered in an arson case? Have you heard about any arson in California or Australia? I'm not sure what this is referring to. The fact that mental illness isn't considered in an arson case? I'm not sure what you're referring to. Should mental illness be considered a factor in an? I'm afraid I'm not sure what exactly you're getting at. If you want to clarify, you don't have to send another super chat if you don't want to. Secular Scholar says, in your Facepalm 5 video, you forgot Andreas Katsoulis, who played Romulan Commander Tomalak on TNG and Ambassador Jakar on Babylon 5. Knowing that, would you change your mind? Oh, about the best actor in both. Yeah, from the post-show of Facepalm 5. Yeah, probably. You're right. Yeah. I think, all due respect to Walter Koenig, I think Andreas Katsoulis was probably a better actor than he was. So yeah, I would go with that. I would say he's the best actor to have appeared in both. Yes, thank you for that, and I would definitely change my mind. Norman Bookwald, without spoilers, how much did you enjoy Picard? For me, it was the best Star Trek pilot, hands down. And a bunch of other people have been talking about Picard in the chat. So I really, really liked it. I don't know if I would say it's the best pilot, but I really, really liked it. It was an excellent first episode. And I am very, very eager for the next episode. I was really, really happy with it. Apocalypso says, I had an idea about a show called Star Trek Prime Directive about rogues who realize the Prime Directive is nonsense, so they go around and help planets. What do you think of that idea? I think that sounds like a great idea. I would totally watch that show. And then right below that, Robert Mills says, were you shocked that carpool karaoke is on a tow rather than driving? I know, right? What's next? Is Jerry Seinfeld not really driving the car when he's driving around with comedians getting coffee? No, it didn't shock me because I know that that's how driving scenes are shot. And it's actually a much, much safer way to do that than to actually have the driver driving and also trying to act or interact with the people in the car. It's just way, way safer to do it with a tow rig. So I was not surprised. I kind of assumed that's how they did it, and I have absolutely no problem with it whatsoever. Robert Mills, I wonder if Picard would have been as helpful to Cardassians. I bet he would have. John Brockman says, do you think if the Borg assimilated Trump, he would corrupt and destroy them? No, the Borg wouldn't assimilate Trump. Trump would be like the Kazon. The Borg would study him, and they would deem him unworthy of assimilation. So no, Trump would not be assimilated. Tenkajechi Budokai, massive spoiler alert. At what point in the Picard premiere did you think Maddox might have been involved in Dodge's construction? Not until they said he was. That never occurred to me until they mentioned his name. And then I thought, oh, that's so cool. That's a reach. That's reaching back a ways. But I thought it was really cool. But no, it never occurred to me until it was actually mentioned. 255 AD, did your parents take you to Washington when you were a kid? Google Earth tells me Hagerstown is less than 100 miles away. Yes, actually, we went to Washington a lot, almost every summer. Once I was of school-going age, we would go to Washington during my summer vacation and visit the museums, visit the Smithsonian. The National Mall and the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. Was a regular destination because, yeah, D.C. is just right down the road. And the Air and Space Museum in D.C. is one of my favorite places on the planet. I could live there if they would let me. Jordan Joan P., have you watched The Crisis on Infinite Earths on the CW? If so, what do you think of it? I thought it was great. Yeah, I watched them the next day after each episode aired, and I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was a lot of fun, really funny. I thought it was really satisfying in many ways. I loved seeing Brandon Routh play Superman again. I loved seeing Tyler Hoechlin's Superman and Elizabeth Tulloch's Lois Lane because I think they're great, and I'm looking forward to them having their show. I thought it was cool seeing Kevin Conroy as like old, bitter Bruce Wayne. I just thought all the cameos were cool. The story was really well done. It was a really good adaptation of the comic that also obviously was a lot different than the comic, but also accomplished something similar for the shows that it did for the comics, which I thought was cool. And yeah, I just thought it was terrific. I loved the Super Friends reference at the end, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was terrific. Daryl Letts, Steve, like you call Trump Lord Dampnut, do you have other nicknames for other politicians and other celebs? And how did you come up with the name Lord Dampnut? I don't really have I'm not really a nickname type of person. I don't have nicknames for other celebs that I can think of. And Lord Dampnut is not mine. That was actually Colin Mockery, the comedian who you might know from Whose Line Is It Anyway? After Trump was elected, I saw on Twitter Colin Mockery tweeted that Lord Dampnut was an anagram of Donald Trump. I think I talked about that in the last episode of Ask Away too. But yeah, so that Lord Dampnut is not mine. I just sort of appropriated it. Some Random Geek says, Twitch is not just gaming now. There is political discussions and just chatting channels. Would you be interested in streaming to Twitch as well? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, would I have? Could I? Would I have to? Would I have to do? And could I just stream this to Twitch at the same time as I'm doing this? I guess I could. But then I would have to pay attention to the live chat on Twitch and the live chat on it's. I don't know. I'm old. I'm old. Old people do YouTube. Declan Lunsman says, if you had to swap a Star Trek species for another fictional one, what would you swap out with what? I would swap the Ferengi and Corpus warframe due to the more extreme display of capitalism there. I'm not familiar with that, so I couldn't say. I don't know. What would be a good swap? Maybe, swap out the Borg with the Cylons, because it's very similar anyway. Caroline Clark, why didn't you do a Lord Dampnut last time? I did. In Facepalm 5, I did do a Lord Dampnut. Der Alte Trekkie. So I have seen Star Trek Disco completely, and I still do not get the negativity. I like that show. So did I. So do I. I liked the first season, and I really, really loved the second season. I don't get the negativity. I mean, I understand people just don't like anything that's different, and it had been a long time since there was new Star Trek on TV, and I think a lot of fans just expected it to be just like it was when Enterprise went off the air in terms of tone and aesthetics, and it wasn't, and they just didn't like that. I don't think that's fair, and I think the Discovery related derangement that has afflicted a lot of fans is just ridiculous. The creating all kinds of conspiracies to, explain why it looks the way it looks, or how it's not actually in the same timeline as everything else. All this fucking horseshit that people made up because they just couldn't handle the fact that somebody made a Star Trek show that they didn't like. But yeah, I don't get it either, because I think Discovery has been a good show from the beginning, and in the second season, it was often very close to a great show. David Colby says, I was writing a bunch of Star Trek knockoffs and cannot think of a name for my knockoff Romulans. Can you think of one? I don't know. God, you could always go super obvious and call them like Centurions, or Appians. Just find like a Roman, find like a Roman term and call them something that's Roman related. It can't be Romulans, so yeah, call them like Appians or I don't know, Corsicans or Athenians or Automulans. I don't know. Seal 0626, would you and Jason consider putting your podcast on Radio Public? Purely selfishly, I find it a lot more user friendly than SoundCloud. I mean, I could ask him about it. That's really, I mean, Jason handles all the production and the uploading and stuff. I could mention it to him. And John, I'm not familiar with the case you're referring to, a Toth K arson. So I can't comment. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the case, and I'm not going to look it up right now. Oh, you're saying you hope they take mental illness into consideration, at least for the sentencing. Yeah, I generally I would agree with that. I think, yeah. I mean, that sounds reasonable to me. But like I said, I don't know the case. And another one from John Burns. Thank you very much. If you do hop on Twitch, you don't need to stream. You can lurk. A streamer I follow is Scene of Action. He makes his own music. Oh, cool. Okay, I've never spent very much time on Twitch at all. I think the only times I've ever been on Twitch is when I was a guest on someone else's stream. Pedro Noguera, do you think we'll get to see Garrick in Star Trek Picard? I mean, the show is focused a lot on Romulans, and our favorite Taylor from Cardassia used to be a gardener on Romulus, right? Yeah, but I think that's probably wishful thinking. I wouldn't expect to see Garrick. I mean, it would be cool if they could come up with an interesting way of incorporating Garrick, and he was there for a reason other than just fan service. That would be great, but I wouldn't. I wouldn't be like biting my nails waiting for Garrick to show up. 255 AD. Should the YouTube admin pull? I think you're meaning to refer to the Whirlpool. Pull the Whirlpool off YouTube. This Michael Swirly guy or whatever he's called seemed like he was calling for genocide in his last vid. Well, I don't know if he was calling for genocide. He was. Well, maybe he was. He was saying we should kill. I guess kill them all and let God sort it out. So yeah, you're right. That is kind of a genocidal wish, isn't it? It's just it's. I never thought of that until just now because it's that phrase has been so normalized, and even those of us who think that that's like a horrific thing to say, like I never put it together. Like, oh shit, that's a wish for genocide, but it totally is. How many of our parents have wished for genocide at the dinner table? I kill them all and let God sort them out. Oh, you want us to commit genocide? Great. I never put that together until just now, so thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, hopefully the YouTube administration recognizes that it's a satire and that the Michael Worley character is actually making fun of people who would say such things. But yeah, people who genuinely call for genocide on YouTube, I wouldn't have a problem with them being banned at all. Some random geek says, wouldn't having representatives making laws give them too much power and power over people? Well, that's why you have laws. That's why you have a rule of law. That's why you have a constitution that limits the power of the representatives and defines and guarantees the rights of the people. Another super chat from John Burns, who says... hang on, I lost it here. This is a real professional. 24 Aussies were arrested for arson. Fireworks? Yeah, it seems a little excessive, doesn't it? As Caroline Clark suggests the Spartacans. The Spartacans. That's great. Caroline Clark, did you hear Seth MacFarlane might be buying Star Trek and moving it to NBC? I would eat my hat if that happened. Seth MacFarlane is not buying Star Trek and moving it to NBC. That I am quite confident that Seth MacFarlane, A, cannot afford it, and no, that's not happening. And I have not heard that, so I don't know. And I'm scrolling back and forth through the chat trying to find questions. So if you asked a question in the live chat and I missed it, it's nothing personal. I just didn't happen to see it. Plasma Burn Death says, what's your thought about impeachment and how well the Dems have presented their side versus the Fourth Reich's clicking heels with the Fuhrer? I think the Democratic presentations have been excellent. I think Adam Schiff has been fantastic. I don't think it's going to do any good. I don't think the Republicans made up their mind before the trial even started. But I think Schiff has been remarkable. Joe McClory, your ad in the latest Whirlpool was so good. Have you ever seen a real religious person flirt with self-awareness like that? Yes and no. I mean, they've said, I've seen real religious people say things that made me stop and think, did they really just say that? Can they hear themselves? But I don't know if I would. Yes, yes, I have. Probably not that obviously. But, sometimes like you have to take it right up to the line, in order to get the joke across. John Newman, do you think CBS will sue the government over copyright issues over the Space Force emblem? Oh, God, I hope so. I didn't even think about that. God, I hope they do. Yeah, for those who don't know, the Trump tweeted the new logo for the Space Force, and it's basically the Starfleet emblem. It looks so much like the Starfleet emblem. It has a delta, it has a globe, it has like a little array, like doing an orbit around it. It looks exactly like a very, very commonly seen form of the Starfleet emblem that has been seen in many different Star Trek productions. And oh, Jesus, I hope that CBS sues them for that. Oh, that would be amazing. Oh, I really hope they do. Apocalypso says, do you think the Dominion is a more plausible, well-constructed villain race than the Borg? I don't know if more plausible, well-constructed. I mean, definitely more interesting. Have more legs to them than the Borg had, sure, because when you set up the Borg as being invincible, then every subsequent time you have them and see them get defeated, then it waters them down. Whereas the Dominion was never presented as invincible. They were just presented as an extremely formidable enemy. But it was never set up as, well, they're invincible. And also, the Dominion storylines were very long sort of sagas, not episode. So really, the Dominion only lost once. It just took a hell of a long time to beat them. Whereas the Borg got, in Voyager especially, they got beaten like every fucking week for a while there. And it really watered them down as a threat. So I think the Dominion are a much better villain. But, I mean, plausible, I don't know. Caroline Clark, where did you find Whirly's rug? I ordered it from Amazon. I'm not exactly sure who the exact seller was, but I ordered it from Amazon. Seal0626 says, do you feel Picard is going a little bit Orphan Black with Dodge? I kind of hope so. That'd be cool, especially the subversion of expectations from having multiple roles played by one performer. I've never watched Orphan Black, so I don't know. 255 AD, why do people keep saying the food dispensers and the hologram tech in Discovery are retcons? Both technologies were established as existing before TNG. Yeah, I don't think the existence of those things is retcons. I think, like with everything else in Discovery, there are visual retcons. I think things look different in Discovery than they looked in classic Trek. But no, yeah, the existence of food dispensers was established already. And holographic tech... I think they've done enough to show that the holograms we see in Discovery are different than the ones we see on the holodeck in TNG. They're not as solid. They're not as realistic. So yeah, I don't think either one of those is a retcon necessarily, except as a visual retcon. It's a stylistic kind of redesign, but I don't think it's a retcon to say that those technologies exist. And I got another super chat here from John Burns. Also, the 90s had the GOP pushing the concept of decency, mainly with art exhibits and music. But Al Gore ran into John Denver over the word high. Yeah. Yeah. But remember, I guess they still are, but you don't hear about it as much. Remember when Republicans were all about indecent art? Oh, Republicans hated. Oh my God, they hated Andre Serrano because he did that art piece of a crucifix submerged in a jar of urine. Oh my God, they hated that shit. Remember that? Tom, I will remind folks about Social Justice Alchemy. Thank you. Don't forget Social Justice Alchemy this weekend. There, I just reminded him. I'm a dick. I'm sorry, Tom. Robert Mills, is the world of Steve and Stuffy completely populated with stuffed animals besides you and your wife? No. There are real people. There are humans in the Steve and Stuffy world alongside stuffed animals. Pedro Noguera, did you like Jean-Luc's dream about the D? Yes, I did. It's nice to know that Jean-Luc dreams about the D, just like other people do. He's only human, I thought it was a lovely dream about the D that Jean-Luc had. Joey Jojo is Donald Trump, a stuffed animal in the Steven Stuffer universe. No, sadly, he is not. 255 AD, how did Michael Worley get a publisher for his books? I assume they were self-published, but at the end he said something about the publisher going out of business. Aha, you missed my favorite joke I have ever put into a Whirlpool video. Yes, Michael Worley does mention that his publisher went out of business, but if you listen closely, the publisher that went out of business is the Staples in West Hazleton. So that was Michael Worley's publisher. So yes, his books are self-published. His publisher his publisher was the Staples in West Hazleton, and I love that joke so much. Oh God, I love that joke. So it's one of my favorite jokes I've ever told in a Whirlpool. So yes, he is self-published. Geek Filter says the Delta is a shape that's been used in aeronautics long before Star Trek, and it would also appear that they borrowed the Delta with the star from a logo for a 1940s conference phone. So I would still like to see him get sued. Yeah, you know. Joey Jojo, why did they need Neelix if they have food dispensers? Because they were saving energy. That's why. Because theoretically, it really never became any sort of a meaningful story point. But in theory, they were supposed to be conserving energy on Voyager, which is why Neelix cooked meals for the crew instead of having everybody use the replicators all the time. Yannick Muller, what are your thoughts on Her Majesty's Secret Service? I think it's a very underrated Bond movie, maybe one of the best. The ski chases are still amazing. Yeah, I think it's good. I was surprised the first time I watched it because it did, for many years, it had the reputation of being like a bad movie. And it's not a bad movie at all. It's a pretty good movie. So, yeah. Apocalypso, how do people reconcile the plain blue uniforms in Discovery with the colorful uniforms from around the same time? I guess if you feel the need to reconcile it, you could just reconcile it the same way you would the uniforms on Deep Space Nine being a different style than the uniforms on TNG for a few years there. Just for whatever reason, some internal Starfleet policy or some other reason, on certain ships, people have different styles of uniforms. I think Captain Pike says something about how the Enterprise got the new uniform, so perhaps we could assume that the uniforms that the crew wears on Discovery are an older style, and the uniforms that we see them wearing on Pike's Enterprise with the more colorful tops are the new style that are being phased in, and the Discovery crew just hasn't gotten the new uniforms yet. That's how you could reconcile it if you want. Pedro Noguera says, I also really love the technology update in Picard. I was wondering if you had anything to say about that. The visual representation of replicators was very cool. Yeah, I agree. I like the little laser like drawing the cup of Earl Grey. I thought that was really cool. Yeah, I like the technology updates. I guess we're going to see that in the next episode, the sort of transporter doorway where people like walk through and it automatically transports them to where they're going. I think that's a really cool visual and a cool update to the transporter technology as well. Joe McClory, is First Contact Picard's Wrath of Khan, or is it Nemesis but done poorly? Nemesis was clearly intended to be Picard's Wrath of Khan, but I don't think it pulled it off. So I would say, and First Contact has a lot in common with Wrath of Khan. I would rather say that First Contact is more Picard's Wrath of Khan, sure. And just for anyone who wonder, I saw some random geek with the details. Tomorrow and every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Universal Time is Social Justice Alchemy on the Social Justice Alchemy channel. And it is some random geek, John Brockman, Tom McDonald, Jamie J, Phoenix, and Leto Anor. So check that out. Watch that show tomorrow, Saturday, starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on the Social Justice Alchemy channel that is linked there in the chat by some random geek. Check it out. Good people. Friends of mine. Personal friends of mine. And John Brockman. 255 AD, what's the Staples? Sorry, okay, that's where the confusion is. Staples is an office supply store. So, yeah. So that's why you didn't get the joke, because you didn't know what Staples was. So yes, that would keep people from getting the joke if you didn't know what Staples was. So yes, I apologize. Staples is like an office supply store where you can have them print stuff out for you. I always thought they let Neelix cook because it kept him out of trouble. Yeah, maybe. Apocalypso says First Contact is more like Voyage Home. Yeah, with the time traveler bit. But that's kind of where the similarities end. I mean, First Contact is very much an action movie, and Voyage Home it has some action in it, but it's more of like a lighthearted adventure movie. So tonally, there's not a whole lot in common with them, except for the time travel. David Colby just wants to say hi. Well, thank you, David. Hello to you as well. Yeah, 255 AD. Sorry about the confusion, but yeah, if you know if you know what Staples is, then you get the joke. And I love that joke. I love that joke. His books are out of print ever since his publisher, the Staples in West Hazelton, went out of business. I'm sorry. I know I should have ended 6 minutes ago. I'm going to wrap up. Let me answer some random geeks question about cops being bastards, and then I'll finish the show. Are all cops bastards? Can communities police themselves without the need for cops? Wouldn't the world be better without the police? I think the world would be better if the police were communities policing themselves. If police forces were accountable to the community and were and police officers were people who actually felt a responsibility to the community and to public safety and to protecting the vulnerable, et cetera, as opposed to the way it is in most cases now. So I don't think that necessarily means getting rid of police, but I do think it means radically reforming them. You know, I'd be happy with that. John Burns, your gated community joke. I think I might have scrolled past it. They mentioned that with indulgences, a sinner could rape the Virgin Mary and still get into heaven. I live in an apartment because I can't trust gated communities. Yes. Meaning, like, I guess in the, there was a joke in the Whirlpool, a side text joke that Chris wrote about, and basically, nobody gets into heaven but people who, like the members only sign applies to on the gate. Pedro Noguera, the only bad bit in First Contact was having Jean-Luc needlessly break the Borg Queen's neck. I don't know if that was bad. It was a little weird though, because it's like, what does that accomplish? Like you beat her, man. You won. You know, I guess it's bad in the sense that it shows Picard being brutal, being vicious, and that's not something we associate with him, and it's not necessarily something his character really needs. Like, do we need to see Captain Picard snapping somebody's neck? I don't think so. Yeah. So, okay. As 255 AD pointed out, I am a little bit over my typical time. So thank you all so much for joining me again. I'm going to step away from the live chat and close the show out. So thank you all for being with me, those of you who are in the live chat. If you asked a question during the live chat and I missed it, I apologize. That was not, I wasn't like intentionally not answering people's questions if I just didn't see it. Sometimes the chat goes by fast and then I go back through and try to find questions and I don't always get to everybody. So I apologize if I missed your question. It was nothing personal. If you enjoyed this show, I want to remind you that you can support this channel by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives. One of the benefits of being a patron for any amount is that you get to submit questions for Ask Away ahead of time. And I answer those questions before I get to anybody else's questions in the live chat. So think about that if you wanted to support this channel, help me continue doing what I do. I also co-host a couple of podcasts with the much funnier and much more talented Jason Harding. Those would be Late Seating and The Ensign's Log, which is a Star Trek-themed comedy podcast for those of you who dig the Star Trek stuff that I do. And Late Seating is a movie review podcast. You can listen to those at letmelistenpodcasts.com and on SoundCloud, and subscribe via RSS using your favorite podcast app using the links below in the description. And speaking of the links in the description, also I want to remind you about the charity links that are in the descriptions of all my live streams. Those are some friends of ours who need a bit of a helping hand, who are in some financial difficulty. If you can afford to help any of them, that would be very, very much appreciated. And even if you can't afford to donate to them personally because you can't spare the money yourself, consider sharing those links on your social media and maybe helping out and helping other people to see, and maybe someone else will be able to help out. So any way you could lend a hand would be very much appreciated by me and by our friends who need a little bit of help. So that's it, everybody. Thank you all once again for joining me. Thank you to all of you in the chat for being with me. I will be back in 2 more weeks to do this again. So until then, take care, everybody, and I'll see you next time.